Mom, Dad, have you ever thought about what actual human needs are? What our needs are? I mean, of course, everybody needs air, food, and water in order to survive, right? But is there more? Well, let me present you then something I was able to learn at university a few years ago. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Who is Maslow? Maslow was a famous psychologist who, in contrary to most of other psychologists, rather investigated successful people, but in terms of positive human qualities, rather than mentally ill or neurotic people. What it actually means to be successful, or success in general, we'll discuss later anyways. But what's important right now is this whole hierarchy that is mainly illustrated by a pyramid and consists of 5 groups. Of course, you cannot define something in life for 100%, right? Especially when we're talking about a theory, about a model. So just a simplified representation of reality. Maybe there's 7 groups, 8, 2, none, whatever. We'll take it as it is, okay? So these 5 groups are from bottom up. The physiological needs. So the essential things that every human being needs in order to survive. So air, food, water, warmth, quite logical, right? The second level, or the second needs that Maslow defined, are the safety needs. We all have this need for security. Security of our body, of our health, of our family, and in our society as well, of our employment and property. The next one is a quite interesting one. Everybody of us has this need to belong to somebody or to something, right? So it's about the belongingness needs, the love needs, such as interpersonal relationships, like friends, family, sexual intimacy as well, and love, of course. The 4th level is called the esteem needs. It's about appreciating oneself, but also getting appreciated by others. It's about recognition, self-confidence, and self-esteem as well. We all have these needs. And the top of this model is called self-actualization, or in other words, the development of our whole potential. A lot of great students of life, like Bruce Lee, Alan Watts, Nick Vujicic, Erich Fromm, Gary Vaynerchuk, Vera Birkenbiel, Dieter Lange, and so on, were talking about self-actualization. And over the last couple of months, it became the most important topic in my life, and I'll show you why. I mean, this whole theory itself seems to be unambiguous, right? Only the illustration can be disputed, since human needs and their influencing factors are dynamic parameters, right? But this whole hierarchy gives a rather static impression. So when one need is met, the next higher need comes to the fore, but when exactly need is met depends on the individual, right? So taking this variable into account, let's say the individual degree of fulfillment of a need, the following illustration results. I don't know where I'm going to put it, here in the video, whatever. Instead of the pyramid, we got curves. So as little children, we just want our basic needs to be covered. But the older we get, the more and more needs arise that want to be satisfied in order to develop our whole personality. If we take a look at those basic needs, the safety and the physiological needs, of course, we'll conclude that in our case, they're fully covered. Admittedly, thanks to you, I never really struggled with those needs, as you did back then when you grew up in Yugoslavia, right? I mean, in general, it's significant for industrialized countries like Austria that the first 2 levels are largely fulfilled. What's due to the economic progress over the past decades. And compared to the past, more and more people can devote themselves to the upper levels. And to be honest, that's my case as well, because in addition to the covered basic needs, I feel a strong belongingness to you. And I feel a strong belongingness to my friends. I know exactly where my place is in my circle of friends. And I know exactly where my place is in my family. So I'm literally privileged to receive love and to give love. Moreover, I'm self-confident and aware of my strengths. Confident enough that over the last couple of months, deep inside myself, I felt this intuitional urge to grow. But to make progress, in terms of my own strengths and projecting that inner desire onto Maslow's model. It signifies that I want to meet the need of self-actualization, that I want to meet the need of developing my whole potential. I mean, everybody has specific talents and strengths, right? And I guess you can already assume what I'm driving at. What about my strengths? What about my talents? You know that I'm good in doing something writing-ish, in doing something talking-ish. I've been always telling you that I'm going to write a book, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do podcasts, and. And you know that I'm good in doing something with football as well, building up this street football network that we already have, for example, organizing tournaments and so on. I love this kind of shit. But do I really develop my strengths that are inflicted with this mentioned intents by means of my current job? No, and you know that. I mean, of course, the question has to be answered is if really every human being strives for self-actualization. Well, self-actualization as Maslow is describing it right now, or has described it, is mostly known in Western or individualistic countries. Unlike in most of the African, Latin American, Asian cultures, they're orientating themselves more to collectivism, putting the individual needs behind the group needs. So it has to be clarified if all cultures are kind of equal or if they're just residing in different development phases. What would also mean that some cultures have to get to a certain point where other cultures already are. I don't want to say that some cultures are better or further than the others. I just want to say that the balance is important, especially in our case. Why do I tell you all this? Well, I just want you to be aware that we grew up in completely different cultures. Both of you in rural areas, in villages, in former Yugoslavia with a collectivistic socialistic system, and me in a city in Austria with a capitalistic system that is inflicted with the era of digitalization. So we might have different understandings regarding certain things, just because we got shaped by different cultures built up on different beliefs. During my exchange semester in Colombia, I realized for the first time how different cultures can be and how much the Austrian culture, for example, differs from the Serbian one. How can we define culture in general? To answer that, I refer to a Dutch social psychologist I learned about back then in Colombia, Hofstede, and he defined culture as the mental programming of the mind. I mean, I really don't want you to perceive me right now as a smartass who is coming up with some pseudo-intellectual shit. I just want to share things that I was able to learn and to realize because it's my main concern that we understand each other completely. So I'll show you by means of another model, the 6 cultural dimensions of Geert Hofstede, the effects of a society's culture on the values of its members and how these values relate to behavior. So I'll show you in which sections Austria differs from Serbia and in which sections I differ from you as well. Because even though we are a family with a tight relationships, we have different values just because we get shaped by different cultures. I want you to be aware of that. So the first culture dimension is called the power distance. So it's describing the equilibrium of power in one culture and how it's divided, or the question how much inequality is desired in a culture and can prevail between people. It applies to hierarchical structures like children, parents, employees, employers, students, teachers. And by the way, every culture dimension has a scale that goes up from 0 to 100 just to illustrate the national differences. So for example, in a culture with a high power distance, the decision process doesn't matter if it's in a family or a company, whatever, goes from up to down and can be doubted. So we talk about a vertical hierarchy. That's mostly known in Serbia, I would say. Whereas in cultures with a lower power distance, more people can participate in the decision process. Of course, and just to be clear, we cannot generalize that for the whole culture since rural areas already differ from cities within the same nation, but the results of these culture dimensions definitely apply to the majority of one culture. So, centralization, where the decision process goes from up to down, it doesn't have to be justified, is mostly known in Serbia. Whereas Austria, for example, is a little bit more decentralized because individual independence, equal rights, and access to direct communication to authority is considered to be important. That was the first dimension. The second dimension describes the relation between individualism and collectivism. So it's dealing with if an individual need is a higher priority than the group needs. Serbia, for example, is a pretty collectivistic country. The families are usually pretty big. The relationships between each other are expected to be very strong, and a long-term dedication between the members is expected as well. And Serbian cultures mainly think in a we form, putting the individual needs behind the group needs. Individualistic countries, for example, mainly think in the I form, what kind of goes hand in hand with the focus on individual self-actualization. Individualism doesn't mean egoism. Individualism just means that caring about oneself and making individual decisions is expected. And since the relationships in these cultures are rather loose, free time and privacy is important as well. Yeah, I guess you know that, right? The third dimension investigates the variety of role division between genders in one culture. Masculine and feminine doesn't mean male and female. In feminine cultures, for example, the role division in general is pretty weak or not present at all. So men and women are equally responsible for the household and for the family as well. Women are free to go for their career as well. Caring about each other is a predominating value, so collaboration, relationships, and so on are pretty important. Success in general is being defined as quality of life. On the other hand, in masculine cultures, there is a clear role division. Let's say masculine cultures are a little bit more career-driven, more focused on competitiveness, on quantity, they have the need that they have to prove themselves. There is a meaning and power of individual achievements as well. So they're a little bit more career-driven. Family is not an acceptable excuse to neglect work, but work is an acceptable excuse to neglect family. Success is being defined as being the best on the pitch. In this case, Gerd Hofstede defined Serbia a little bit more feminine. And I don't particularly agree with it, to be honest, because in our case, for example, you would both say, right, that the Serbian culture is a little bit more masculine. And this definitely applies to rural areas, in my opinion. Maybe in cities it's different, but as our parents, our relatives and so on are all living in villages and so on, we know how it's working there. A little bit more, masculine. Let's say about that. Let's say like that. Whatever. The fourth one is called uncertainty avoidance, and this one literally made me think, fuck, this describes my whole family, except me. It deals with a society's tolerance on uncertainty, anxiety, and distrust in the face of the unknown, and conversely with the wish to have fixed habits, fixed rituals, and to kind of know the truth. So cultures that have a specific, let's say high score on this particular scale is Serbia, for example. And you know that because Serbian cultures, let's say cultures with a high uncertainty avoidance, they don't like uncertainty. What's kind of funny because everything in life is uncertain except death and change. There is an intolerance regarding uncommon behavior, uncommon ideas as well. So a preference to formalization, standardization, and rules. And change in general is mostly being perceived as a threat and not as an opportunity. So there could be some resistance towards innovation. The fifth dimension kind of describes the time orientation of cultures. It was added in 1990 when Hofstede realized that Asian cultures, for example, mostly secure for later generations, that every house has, one separate floor for the sun and so on. And that's the case in Serbia as well. You know that. And so long-term oriented cultures have the need to be prepared for the future. And that's especially the case in Serbia, right? But Austria as well. So they're kind of the same in that case, but whatever. And the last dimension is called indulgence versus restraint. And it's kind of new, and it describes the way of living out one's needs in a society. For example, in indulgent cultures, freedom is important. Doing what your impulses tell you to do is considered to be good, and the way of thinking is a little bit more optimistic. In restrained cultures, there is a feeling that life is kind of hard, and duty, not freedom, is a state of being. So the way of thinking is a little bit more pessimistic, with a slight tendency to cynicism. So having a more negative point of view is common, right? And what describes the Serbian culture, but especially you, Dad, best, is that taking rest or chilling is kind of wrong, because I could have been productive while I was taking a rest, right? So indulgent feelings and personal wishes are getting kept under forced control just due to societal norms. Why do I tell you all this? I just want that we understand each other completely, because it's a simple fact that we have differences in terms of feeling, thinking, and behavior, right? I'm mainly thinking in German, for example. Please be aware of that. And it's not just about the language. Do you remember when we were philosophizing about why people are the way they are? And we had this third approach? And guess what? According to Gerhard Hofstede, our approach is like his theory. What is it called? The 3 levels of uniqueness in mental programming. You are the foundation of me because I inherited your genes, right? And what gets me excited is the next level, the culture. Because culture is something you learn and not something you inherit. Culture originates from our whole societal environment and not from our genes. So besides family, it's about the friends that you hang out with, the school that you attend, the university that you attend, the sports that you do, the music that you listen to, the movies that you watch and prefer. And it's a matter of a subculture as well, like it's hip-hop, for example. And you know how much I'm identifying myself with it, even though you're not a huge fan of it. So if we take every single factor into account that I just mentioned, we conclude that we represent totally different cultures. Moreover, the top of this model symbolizes our own self, our personality that is uniquely equipped with our moods, with our feelings, opinions, attitudes, and so on. It's something that we experience. So it distinguishes one individual from another. So again, we got the genes that we inherit, right? So we got the culture that we learn, and we got our own self that we experience. I guess you have a specific feeling right now or understanding what makes us people different. But what's more important is what actually unites us. And in this case, it's that we're all human beings and that we want to spend our lives on this planet as happy as possible. Because everybody wants to be genuinely happy and content, no matter what kind of asshole somebody is. And that leads me to the well-known question of meaning. So, what do you live for? What makes you happy? What is your purpose? I mean, in my own limited experience, I found that a lot of people have a defense mechanism towards this question. And for some reason, they don't want to think about it more into detail. So it's a little bit common to label that it's something wannabe, philosophical, or hippie-ish with a negative connotation. But if we're truly honest to ourselves, we desire clarity. And that leads me to the last model that I want to present to you, a Japanese concept called ikigai. And it illustrates the factors of our own individual meaning of life. I mean, I'm not sticking completely to these models. I'm just using it as an orientation. Let's say like that. So, ikigai. Iki means life, and gai means value. So it literally means life value, or in other words, worth living. So it's about finding out what life makes worth living for the individual. It's about finding out what your life makes worth living for you. I mean, life itself should be worth living, right? But right now I'm referring to the work life. If we take a look at this model, there is not much room for skeptical questions, because find out what you love. Find out if you're good at it. Find out if the world can make use out of it. And find out how you can secure existence with it. That's it. I mean, one might get overwhelmed by this model, but just because he never intended to invest more time into a profound self-discovery. Because at the second side, there's one question that can be answered by everybody. What do you love? What do you love doing? What do you love, for example, since your childhood, and it's still an essential part of your life? Then just figure out if you're good at it, and the rest is going to come up automatically. I've been kind of able to define these points for me because I had a lot of free time over the last couple of months, and I'm really, really grateful for that. So what's my passion? What do I love? What am I good at? It's football in that case. And of course, I'm not going to become a professional football player. We all know that, but what I'm aiming for is different anyways. Developing my potential in terms of football means maintaining the organization of regional street football tournaments that we already do, and expanding it on a national and a global level. I want to expand this unique street football network that we already have, and afterwards develop an app as well and a brand, because I just see a fucking huge potential in Kings of Glassheim. And considering my other passion, you surely remember that I love to express myself in a written manner in school. I've been always telling you as a 12 years old or something that I'm going to write a book. I don't know when and how, but I always had this intuitional feeling that I'm going to write a book, and I know that I'm going to do it. And in my case, writing goes hand in hand with talking as well, because from the very first moment when I did my first poetry slam and literally made other people cry because I was able to touch them deeply, I discovered my love for the microphone and the power of it. So this literally made me think about becoming a professional speaker, a podcaster, and so on. And another way of expressing my writing skills by means of a microphone is rapping. I mean, over the last couple of months, or the whole year, I would say, I've been standing next to streets, sidewalks, and so on, rapping in front of complete strangers, and I never ever received a single negative feedback. So this literally made me think about becoming an actual rapper. Maybe it sounds ridiculous, but when I think about it, I grew up with it. I always loved to listen to rap music, to hip-hop in general. And I didn't perceive it just as songs. I perceived it as little books, because I loved or I still love, to dissect these lyrics and to compare it to poets like Goethe and so on. So for me, it doesn't sound ridiculous at all. I mean, I've been dedicating my life to these topics for quite a long time, I would say, but I would undoubtedly invest more time in it. And of course, I cannot go for all of them at the same time. So I got to specialize at least in one field where I see the greatest potential. And in this case is writing, I guess. I mean, when I was working, or all the people that I met over the last couple of years, the majority of them, employees in companies and so on, are kind of acting as working robots, and somehow are underlying a foggy mirror state. The illusion that with their work, they're helping themselves, their family, their company, their country, but in the end, they're not even living, they're just functioning. You have this feeling that they're not present at the moment, as if they don't see any meaning in life. Like that, yeah. And in the end of the work life, they are realizing that they're easily changeable, and then in fact, they didn't live a real life at all. So it kind of pathetically became normal to have a job you don't like, to complain about it 24/7, and to just work for the weekend. I mean, what kind of life is that if you're just working for the weekend? Because in my life, I want to look forward to Monday with the same motivation I bring up for Friday. I mean, why the fuck should I just work for the weekend? Why should I just do something I don't like? How come that most people would rather just exist than actually live? What do you actually work for? I've been asking myself these questions for quite a long time, and it's time to make a huge cut in my life, because I've been always telling you that I'm going to quit my job because I have other plans in my life, especially traveling on the long term. And you know that every time I mention my future ambitions, you've been not kind of taking it for serious, or maybe just denied that the moment will come when I'm gonna move out from home and start doing risky things. With traveling on the long term, I don't mean that I want to lie on beaches for a year and not do anything. With traveling on a long term, I mean that I want my time for myself in a completely new environment to restructure my life in order to focus on my ikigai, let's say like that. So I implore you to stop thinking exaggeratedly that something negative is going to happen in the future just because I will not choose the career path that you expected me to go. I mean, I'm not on this world to live up to your expectations, and you're not on this world to live up to mine. So it's important that I get the opportunity to be me, that I can make progress on the way I want, and that I can be responsible for my personal decisions, because that's the only way you learn in life, right? So don't judge, or don't let yourselves have judgments regarding my creativity, or because the way I view life is not the same as you perceive it. I mean, a lot of children do things for the parents because the majority doesn't like confrontation, because the majority doesn't like a bad relationship on a short term. And a lot of parents have expectations regarding their children. They have expectations regarding the way their children are supposed to do specific things. But at a specific period, the child knows it better what's better for it, more than the parents think they know. The problem is, if children continue with doing something just for the parents and not for themselves, even though there is a complete other opportunity to do something they actually like, a bad relationship is gonna develop continuously because they're gonna regret that they didn't go their way. So it's better for the children to fight for their time in order to develop a really good relationship than thoughtlessly doing something they don't like, and as a result of this, to judge themselves because they didn't go their way, and to judge their parents because they didn't let them go their way. This is going to cause a bad relationship on the long term. I mean, you know it. I've been doing, for example, these 5 years in this technical school. I graduated and so on. Cool, yeah. And I did it just because you told me that I'm going to have a safe job afterwards. And that's true, and blah, blah, blah. But did I show any single interest in those 5 years regarding this whole course and so on? No. And it wasn't the case with studying industrial engineering as well. I mean, it's okay. It's really okay, because time is now, and right now I have the opportunity to dedicate myself fully to my passion, completely. And reality is that that's unbelievably hard, but whatever, because everybody's unexceptionally talented. It's just about finding, recognizing, and developing it. So develop your talents, develop your strengths in order to be genuinely happy. And I'm talking about the long term and not just about the following days. So please, let me be successful in my life on my terms and not on yours. I mean, I'm aware of the fact that you just wish the best for me, but like, you're responsible for your life. I gotta be completely responsible for my life, right? Everybody's different. And like I showed you in the last, I don't know how many minutes, or even we are completely different. We're family. We love each other. You're the most important people to me. Otherwise, I would not have prepared what I'm doing right now. But you must understand that I have different plans for my life. I know, or I can imagine, that it's going to be a little bit hard for you to explain it to others what I actually want to achieve in life. But this doesn't matter at all, because don't overvalue other people's opinions more than mine. Have this understanding for me and be that self-confident to trust me. Let me just live my life and do that, what is actually fulfilling me. Because in the end, you just want me to be successful. You just want me to realize my full potential. You just want me to be happy. So this is my valuable time, and I don't want to sell my time. And you cannot buy time anyways.